Hey everybody, welcome to On The Homefront. John Murphy here with you again. Very happy to be sharing some time with you. Maybe here live on WILI, AM 1400 or 95.3 on the FM. We're also on YouTube. If you go to the WILI Radio YouTube channel, all the shows we have that are recorded, they're there for you to archive 24/7 for all of our shows. It's also, a way to reach our guests. You can get a link to share your show. So after we have a conversation, you can share it in your media, in your network as well, to help people stay in touch in a better way. Our program today will focus on online journalism. It's another one in a series of conversations I've had in the last year about journalism in our state. We're living in very troubled times, to be polite about it, and seeing how people are working in online news gathering and sharing with you, I think would be a very good thing to do right now. And so that would be the bulk of our show. And then for the second half, we're going to have a visit from Katie Hoffman. She's doing the third annual Trigger Warning Art Show at the Moulton Art Gallery up here on Moulton Court. She'll be here for the second part of the show, looking at a very interesting way to connect art and mental health. So first of all, I want to introduce our guests and thank them for driving here to be with us from Hartford. To my far right, we have Connor Dragotas here. He's the managing editor at the Connecticut Inside Investigator. Thank you for being here and for coming out.
Absolutely. Wouldn't miss it.
It's good to have you here. And also we have an investigative reporter, Brandon Whiting, is here as well. Thanks for coming out today.
Thank you for having me.
So, I got into news from my parents. I was lucky that in my house as a kid there was a newspaper and they watched the TV and I got into news that way. But that's not always the case today. Journalism has gone through incredible changes. But right now, with what's happening in our government at the state level, at the national level, all the systems are being tested. And journalism was one of the things that gave us our colonial freedom. It was one way that we were connected during very bad times. And right now, we need journalism more than ever, but people are not paying for it the way they used to. And we need to talk about that today to get you to start subscribing to local papers or online sources and to try to connect to it more often because things are happening very fast. And one of their challenges is keeping up with it and translating it so you can understand and make sense of it yourself every day. So I want to begin by thanking you for your work in this tradition, keeping it alive when our democracy is very much being tested.
Certainly. Happy to be doing this work. It's so important, and we love it. Frankly, that's one of the most important reasons that we could be here is we genuinely care about it.
So for the first part of the conversation, we're kind of talking about the roots of this and kind of coming up to 2025 and looking at the changes that brought them here to be with us and to share into online journalism. Then we're going to look at the future of AI and technology and how can we make journalism pay for itself. So maybe you could start us out, Connor, with your decision initially to pursue the path. Out of all the ways you could have applied your energies, you chose journalism and storytelling, and that might be a good thing to pursue. I always ask artists about that. What was your original impulse?
Oh, man. Well, so Inside Investigator was, I think, bred out of a necessity. Necessity is the mother of invention, and one of our other reporters, his name is Mark E. Fitch. He's our senior investigative reporter, and a title that he uses less frequently is co-founder of this brand. So me and him started to work on this together because he used to be a reporter with Yankee Institute, which is a think tank, right? A policy organization.
Right.
And he found himself getting news tips that had nothing to do with their policy. So what do you do with that? You want to be a good reporter. You want to serve the people with information they need, but you really don't have the ability to do it in a narrow policy organization. So I became involved in the conversation because Connecticut's lost 50% of their newsroom since 2004. And we realized
20 years.
Yeah, exactly. So we realized we could create something that would hopefully serve the people and be able to give Mark the opportunity and other reporters who have come on along the way to create incredible stories with a very narrow mission we want to root out corruption in Connecticut. Not part, all of it is the goal. And it's ambitious, but that's part of what this is about is we're going to shoot big.
So, but when you first decided to take the plunge, you had already made the decision to avoid the whole print paper mode. You said, yep, it's going to be online from the beginning.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Part of it is, frankly, money, right? I mean, you already alluded to it, but it's tough to keep the lights on in newsrooms. We've seen that's why some of that 50% decrease occurred. Is it's very, very difficult. And it's also just a grind on people, right? You have reporters churning out how many stories in a day sometimes. So we wanted to do something different where we're making sure our reporters have the resources to be successful, to pursue what they love. And absolutely, do it online so we can keep up with the times and serve people where they're at, not where we want them to be.
Right. So, Brandon, as a writer, you made another kind of decision, is you want to pursue the path of writing and covering stories and people and organizations. So, and you've been writing, you mentioned, maybe for 4 years after school and about a year or so here with CII.
Yep.
So, first of all, what got you into the path? And how has it been now that you've actually engaged, you've passed the school process, and you're actually waist high in the work every day? Maybe neck high is better, but we'll say waist high for now. Yeah.
Yeah, so I was always kind of a bookworm as a kid, and naturally that kind of lends itself to writing. So I'd write a lot creatively as a child. And one of the things that I also really took an interest in reading about and also, watching movies or documentaries about was history. My grandpa was a big history guy, my brother as well.
Okay, it's in the family.
Yeah, exactly. And similar, how you described your upbringing, as your parents were always very aware of what was going on. They always had the news on. They always had the newspaper delivered, news on the TV all the time. It was the same thing in my home. So just having a kind of a strong foundation for writing and an appreciation for history and, kind of just that awareness of what's going on current events-wise, I started to realize maybe like my sophomore to junior year of high school, journalism is kind of a good way to bridge all of these strengths and interests together, because I've always been fascinated in different cultures around the world. I've always been fascinated about why things happen the way they do. And I think when you're looking at current events, a lot of times, if you don't know the history, you don't know half of the story. And so...
Or how do you tell the story?
Exactly. Yeah, you can't properly contextualize it. You don't understand the root causes or, the anthropological trends going on. And obviously, I'm not a world news reporter currently, but that was what really got me into it, was just thinking, well, I've always loved history. I've always been good at writing. I don't want to be pigeonholed to, an office or a classroom for my entire life. Not that that's a bad thing, because a history teacher was what I was initially thinking I would be. Okay. And then I just started looking into the career of journalism more and more, and I was like, I think that's a pretty good fit. Instead of reading about and teaching history, the hope is that one day you're the guy who's writing it,
Exactly.
So, yeah, that's kind of what got me into it.
That's why I'm really happy to do these occasional interviews with journalists around the state, because the future really is an open question right now. If there are not a lot of young people like him around that are going to do the work the way young radio dudes paid their dues doing overnight radio, all the production work in order to get into the business. With the collapse of the industry, and we can talk about that in another show about how it got to be so bad, the jobs aren't there. And that's a compromise in your ability to know what's going on. And that's why we're here today. It's really about you keeping track of what's going on, because things are not normal. I don't have to tell you that, or we're not going to waste time. Things are not normal. And if you don't read the news or follow it, you should start doing that. And that's a question for you now. Since everything is abnormal, you're looking really at the state, how it plays out. How do you decide, with all the governmental challenges for health care and transportation and all the issues that we have, how do you decide what to cover and what has to wait when there's so many things all the time?
From day one, we had a philosophy as a newsroom. We sat down, we brought in the first people that we hired, and we said, how are we going to, again, truly serve our readers? And part of what we created was this, practice guide. And one of the points that we have on there is you have to have fun. And what that means in practice truly is that our reporters, I am not laying down, Brandon, hey, wake up, here are the 3 stories you're going to write this week. It's Brandon, what do you care about? What is catching your eye? What is most interesting? And by having a team that's not monolith in their belief, that has this, ideological diversity, we're able to get a wide swath of ideas that, it seems to be working as well. People are responding to it at the least. That you don't necessarily know what you're going to get every single day from Inside Investigator, because Brandon might wake up and say, you know what? I'm going to start looking at a dog that mauled a 95-year-old woman to death in Suffield, right? And that's going to turn into an investigation that, spans 8,000 words and digs in, or you might be getting the most recent from the State House. So we try to keep it fresh and interesting, and I think that's really a credit to our reporting team more than anything else.
So one thing I want to do, because we are doing live radio here and it's on YouTube, I want to mention who our guests are today. We are talking about journalism with Connor Dragotis and Brandon Whiting from CII, the Connecticut Inside Investigator. Now, how do you deal with issues when you're trying to get information about something that has really gone wrong and someone's under a lot of pressure, good or bad, and you have to find out truth in the middle of heat? And in order to get your story, you need to go somewhere that's uncomfortable for somebody, but you need to do the job. How do you walk that line without getting into the Hollywood stuff? But you're dealing with someone's emotions in their lives, right? And you have to find out. So how do you manage those waters?
That's like the greatest and the worst part of the job, I would say.
I'm glad I asked about that.
When you pull it off, you're really just like, darn. Like, we're growing here. It's not all the time, I would say, that it's, kind of life or death. I think a lot of when you're dealing with a scandal at a state agency or, some larger institution, you're not dealing with the person whose feet are to the fire, right? You're dealing with the press guy who's giving you the release that answers 2 of the 17 questions you've sent. But when you're dealing with people's personal lives, that's when it really starts to get... that's when it can get interesting, we'll put it that way. I guess I didn't think I'd be tooting my own trumpet this early, but the good example, a good example that I can think of, or probably the best example I can think of thus far, is one of the stories I did, Khan Academy. It was dealing with all of these allegations of fraud, and it's a private high school here in Putnam, and essentially the owners of the school have been alleged to have defrauded millions of dollars from various investors. And so when you're going into, their school and the entire premise of your story is, hey, people are saying that everything you're presenting to the public and everything that you're doing behind the scenes at this school is a lie, you're not really, naturally things are kind of tense. So
you're not going to get invited back, probably.
Yeah, probably not.
Yeah, but it's true. That's the job.
Exactly. So that's really what it comes down to, is you just have to tell yourself, look, this is the job. Everyone has perhaps a different way of going about it, but I find for me it's just the best to kind of, at least I try and separate myself from the story, right? It's, look, this is my job. You have your job. I have mine. This is the story that I've been given, because you don't have a story without sources. I'm not out here just making things up, So it's like, look, this is what I've been told. This is what I've heard. These are the facts that I have to go off of, Don't kill the messenger, essentially, and just trying to relate to people on kind of a human level where, you give them space. If things get rough, they need a break in the interview. They need a break in the interview. If there's arguments going on behind the scenes with the people you're interviewing, let them. You just you play it by ear, essentially. That's
sometimes you're a silent witness, aren't you? Right?
Yeah, I say it a lot. Is being a journalist, more often than you would perhaps anticipate going into it, you kind of feel like a therapist sometimes. You put in a lot of unpaid hours listening to people's problems, and that may sound horrible. I don't mean that in a callous way, because it's the job to give people those hours,
Well, part of it is if people don't give you those hard words, you don't have the words to say to tell their story honestly.
Yep.
otherwise you're guessing the words rather than having them kind of share the truth, and then you caught it. The right way, though, the right way.
Yeah, I always tell sources, I'd so much rather you keep me on the phone for 3 hours and tell me way too much than have it be someone who's, it's like pulling teeth or pulling fingernails trying to get information out of them. So it's absolutely no problem on my end.
Yeah. I'm sure anybody that Connor sends out has to at some point go through that kind of decision. But I want to mention, too, some good news here. We have plenty of time left, but we're coming up on the 3rd birthday. So I should give congratulations, and I should have brought a big thumb here to give you a thumbs up.
The cake's in the lobby.
A thumbs up. 3 years for any new business, especially these days, is a wonderful sign.
Thank you.
And I wondered if you could share the good news that's coming out, too, because you've actually, all of the hard work you've done has brought some wonderful rewards for you.
Yeah, so this weekend, April 20th, marks 3 years since we publicly launched InsideInvestigator.org, which is wonderful, so exciting. And as you alluded to, we also just got notification last Friday that we won our 37th award as a newsroom. So 19 of those were first place from state, regional, national competitions.
Wow.
It's we don't do it for the awards, but I do like to think that when we win something, it's indicative of, like Brandon said, you're able to tell a human story. I mean, one of our taglines is journalism by humans for humans. And I think it's a good gut check for us to remember that, we're not perfect. We're always going to try to do the best that we can. We're not going to lay it out with absolute perfection, but we're also serving it up to people. And we always have to keep that in mind to provide that white glove service. And ultimately, that's why we exist, right? If we're not acting in service to our readers, we shouldn't be in business, frankly. That's something that we need to keep in mind. We have since day one, and we're going to keep doing that in the future.
Well, one of the best things about the work that they do is that compared to their predecessors before, the phones and our mobile devices have been an incredible way to connect to you. And I wondered now, let's kind of shift gears a little bit into how you're getting the work out. Is how are you finding the best success in ways that you reach out to people so they learn about you and stay connected?
I guess from a philosophical point of view, we want to meet people where they are. Mm-hmm. I think so often, businesses do this, right? This draw people to you mentality, but that creates friction. That creates a lot of work. And when Brandon, you could probably talk about getting invited into communities as well as a way to do this. But by building those human connections, there's an in-person element. And then, of course, the final product goes out on Facebook and Instagram and TikTok. And our hub for everything is InsideInvestigator.org. That's where all of our content can be found. But we want to make sure that when we're publishing this amazing work, it doesn't just get lost on a website somewhere. We want to put it in the communities where people are actually going to read it. And most importantly, where it's relevant to them, not just kind of a shotgun approach.
Yeah. I think that's one of the things that's really stood out to me working here in particular is just first and foremost from the community side of things. Mm-hmm. We have gotten some of the greatest stories from people reaching out to us and providing us with tips. So a lot of the work that we do, I mean, truly, it would not be possible if we didn't get tips from people. So you got to tip your hat to the people that read our stuff, that contribute. And then on the other end of things, like Connor was saying, the targeting of specific communities on Facebook, the using of social media, I think we do a really good job of kind of like branching the models from like old school journalism where if you open an investigation, this is not listicles, you're gonna get hit with a 8,000 word monstrosity that's going to test your attention span. And
on both ends, right?
Yeah, certainly. But at the same time, so that's kind of like sort of the old school journalism where it's like, look, we're not afraid to write long articles and go really deep in on the issues because back in the day, newspapers had the resources to do that, and so that's why it's become less and less common.
True.
But on the new school end of things, just kind of the use of our Instagram page, putting things out on Facebook and putting them in the communities, with which they're most pertinent to. Like, I think Inside Investigator does a really good job of kind of marrying the old school, foundations of journalism as far as the work goes with kind of the new school. How do you promote it? How do you put it out there? How do you try and make it as palatable as possible kind of in the digital media landscape?
Like, here's a good example today, because I get these in an email. You can sign up for these, and it comes to you on a regular basis with news you might otherwise miss. The topic here, there's one on efforts to limit healthcare costs. That's a big story. There's one on the proposed soda tax, that some people are really freaking out about soda taxes. The PURA, the whole utilities, public utility regulation controversy going on about that new appointment. Some teachers having a behavior problem, we'll leave it at that. And also about your right to know. That ties into FOIA, because you were trying to get some funding for the FOIA grants. Correct. In fact, maybe we should jump into that. But you could sign up for these on the website, and it's part of your daily stream of information, which is very useful, by the way. Thank you.
Thank you.
You had mentioned that based on your awards, you had applied for a grant from Press Forward, which is trying to help grow journalism around the country. If you look at Press Forward, you'll find good information. You're trying to get some lawyers to help you as journalists to get information and to get over the walls. Can you talk about that and why you need that to do your jobs today?
Yeah.
Why is it so hard to get answers?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. So for the next 6 hours, I will be laying out for you. We have...
Keep rolling the tape.
We have, and this is not unique to our newsroom, journalists have a very hard time getting information. And in many ways, there's this vehicle that is supposed to be working to help journalists, and this is the Freedom of Information Act, where I should be able to send an email and public information can be provided back so our talented journalists can translate it, get it into a digestible form, and feed it to the public so that they can understand and make informed decisions, right? Now, our mission is to root out corruption, and upstream of that is the ability to get information in the first place, to evaluate it.
Right.
And unfortunately, one of the things that we found with many, many state agencies is that they are not moving the ball forward to actually get us information that we request via FOIA. And unfortunately, these are very serious topics. We're talking about physical and sexual abuse by college professors in the state system in Connecticut. We're talking about, environmental damage, proposed, questions about whether or not environmental damage and human health damage will be done as a result of a project.
Right.
We waited almost 2 years to get back a single request that yielded less than 40 documents. Yeah, we are actively seeking support to continue fighting these foot dragging, stonewalling, whatever you want to call it.
Right.
But something needs to change here because we are entitled to those documents, but more importantly, our readers are entitled to documents. You deserve to be informed about what's going on in your community. So yes, we will file those FOIA requests. We will help you file those FOIA requests. But at the end of the day, if we need to, we're going to be in front of the Freedom of Information Commission 3 times in the next 90 days, challenging improper redactions, people who have dragged their feet and just not gotten us documents. We're going to put in the fight to make sure that this information gets out there.
Is there anything that you would recommend? Let's get the crystal ball out just for a couple of seconds, because this is an ongoing struggle. This is not new. When people argue in court or they look at cases, what is the thing that tips the scale that lets people go for 2 years and not pay a price for it? When you need to reply within, like certain agreements, you need to reply in 15 days, 20 days. There's some honorable exchange. I know you're busy, but give me 30 days, right? 2 years? Unforgivable.
Well, Connecticut law requires the request to be acknowledged in 4 days. After that, there is no limit. Other states have limits. I've done this in Pennsylvania is the one that stands out to me because it's 30 days. And if they want to take more time, even if, let's say, it's a massive request, they want to take more time, they have to ask you as the requester, hey, is this okay? Can we do this? And, it creates a good-natured back-and-forth relationship where the presumption is still this information deserves to be out there. In Connecticut, there is no time limit, so that's how you end up with this thing. And unfortunately, what we've seen is those documents tend to appear very, very quickly. As soon as you threaten to take them to the FOIC or bring legal action, they materialize.
Wow.
And that I think is at least indicative anecdotally. It's telling us something that's really important.
Right. Well, the story doesn't go away until it's over, that's for sure.
Exactly.
But that's a good example of what these folks go through all the time. In fact, maybe we just have a couple minutes to go, though, but I have invited them to come back periodically and share their work, because we've talked about their work and see about this lawyer project. But I guess when people are struggling with the news, do you have advice for people? How can they more easily recognize fake news or insincere information that's not really there to give you, and somebody makes an honest mistake, but disinformation? What can people do to be smarter about whatever news they do consume? What could they do?
That's a great question.
I definitely have thoughts, but Brandon, by all means,
that's a great question.
you want to go ahead?
People struggle with the news because they want to trust it, but they don't know always how.
Yes.
Right.
I would agree. I think as journalists, you can kind of, there's like an assumption of media literacy and of understanding of like the work that you do that is not really there in the general public, and you can't fully blame people. It's not something you learn in school, and
No.
even if you did, if you're 40 years old or 30 years old, even you did not grow up in the information landscape that we have now. So even if you were taught about it in school, fat load of good it would do you, frankly. I mean, I think the biggest thing is kind of triangulating your sources. That's kind of one of the things that they tell you about in journalism school, as far as trying to find, the truth on anything. You have to suss out, get my news from here, get my news from there, get my news from somewhere else. And as journalists, a lot of the time, everyone loves to say that we're reporting the truth, but and a lot of the times, you're reporting the closest thing you can get to the truth. You're trying to grind down, as many different edges as you can to form the best possible consensus with the limited information that is on offer, right?
That's true.
And
that's exactly right.
I think...
and that goes back to the paper tradition, because it's only one time that day. In 24 hours, that story could totally flip. In all good faith, you got new information. Mm-hmm. You don't know. That's part of the joy in news, is it changes all the time.
Yep.
Right.
And so I think for people, the best thing to do is I think back on the advice that I've given my parents in the past is read your news. I think a lot of what you see on TV, especially at a national level, not so much at a local level, but at a national level, if you watch the news, you'll get a good basis of the facts, but a lot of it is, it's like 20%, 30% of the time is spent on presenting the facts, and then the other 70% is bringing one talking head from this side, the other talking head from the other side, and just having them argue it out. And I don't know that it's super conducive to having the deepest understanding. It's certainly better than nothing, I would say.
Fair enough.
I think we also try intentionally at Inside Investigator to inspire critical thinking.
Yes.
Because when people pick up something, you are carving out a niche as someone who's not afraid to write long pieces, right? I think your longest was 12,000 words,
Really?
which was massive piece.
That's a doorstop.
We want to inspire people to take the time, right? There's a reason that we publish investigations on Sundays. I don't want you in your office and, distracted by other things. Sit down on a Sunday morning, grab your cup of coffee, sit on the deck, and, read this really deep, informative thing that could hopefully improve your life for the better. For me, it comes down to media diet, which I think is the same thing that you're talking about with triangulation, right? Don't be afraid to use that block button. When you see something that isn't quality, know that they're serving you a cheap meal, and that, the red meat is out there, the good stuff is out there. And once you find it, follow it. Make sure that it's getting fed back into your feeds. Ultimately, you're responsible for what you take in. And I think we want to be in the business of trusting our readers to make that smart decision and helping them to make that smart decision anytime they're faced with information. Be a critical thinker.
Well, that's a really good way to wrap up our conversation, hopefully our first of a few over the years. But thank you very much for being here today. The website again, insideinvestigator.org. Sign up for these newsletters. Stay in touch. I wish you good luck with your work. Congratulations on your birthday and the awards. We'll have you back maybe in the summertime to follow up on this. So we've had Connor Dragotis, the managing editor and one of the co-founders, along with reporter Brandon Whiting. Thanks again for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Okay, so you hang with us a couple of minutes. You stay with us. We had some messages, and then we'll come right back and talk about the Trigger Warning Art Show. Stay with us. Hey, we're back in the studio.